under AADS, African Diaspora Studies, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. For today, we are looking at Fuji documentary and lecture as we celebrate Black History Month for this year, 2025. And we are honored to have the producer of this documentary in our midst, Professor Saheed Aderinto from Florida State University. Thank you. So briefly before I call Professor Aderinto up, I want to call on Bonita to come and read a short bow for Professor Aderinto. Can you put our hands together for her as she comes?
Hi, everyone. Professor Saheed Aderinto, a filmmaker and the founding president of the Lagos Studies Association, is the author of Animality in Colonial Subjecthood in Africa, the Human and Non-Human Creatures of Nigeria, published by Ohio University Press, New African History Series in 2022, Guns and Society in Colonial Nigeria, Firearms, Culture, and Public Order, published by Indiana University Press in 2018, and When Sex Threatened the State, Illicit Sexuality, Nationalism, and Politics in Colonial Nigeria from 1900 to 1958, published by University of Illinois Press in 2015, which won the 2016 Nigerian Studies Association's Book Award for the most important scholarly book on Nigeria published in the English language. His current book project is titled Fuji, The History of an African Popular Culture. The first episode of his debut documentary film, the Fuji documentary, premiered in February 2024, and since then it has been screened at academic conferences, documentary film festivals, public spaces, and university campuses in Africa, Europe, and North America. Critics, which include popular culture scholars, historians, and filmmakers, describe the Fuji documentary as a landmark in popular music documentation, a must-see, a powerful trailblazing, and oratorical historical masterpiece by a master of the subject and a brilliant visual narratologist. Episode 2 of the documentary, titled The Women of Fuji, will premiere in commemoration of the 2026 International Women's Day. In 2023, Aderinto won $300,000 Dan David Prize, the largest history prize in the world, in recognition of his outstanding scholarship that illuminates the past and seeks to anchor public discourses in a deeper understanding of history. On behalf of AfricologyNOW, join me in welcoming Professor Aderinto.
Yeah. And thank you for that great introduction. I think the way it's going to go today is that I will provide some context to this documentary, and then after providing the context, then I will then screen an hour out of it. It's a 2-hour documentary. Okay, 1 sec. So it's a 2-hour documentary. So I'm just going to screen 1 hour out of the 2 hours, and then we have question and answer, and I'm going to be more than happy to respond to your questions. First, I would like to thank AfricologyNOW student organizers for inviting me again here. I was here 2 years ago in 2023-4, and I came and then it was nice because it was not that cold. And then, but today they told me that I came at the right time because it was cold last week. Maybe I'm just escaping from your inclement weather. Thank you for getting me here and allowing me to escape the not too perfect weather. And thanks everyone for coming. I know everyone is busy and it's great to have you here. In February 2024, episode 1 of my first documentary film titled the Fuji documentary, which tells the history of a major cultural or popular culture of the Yoruba people of Nigeria and the global African diaspora. It premiered in Ibadan. Since then, since February 2024, the film has been screened at college campuses, academic conferences, film festivals, and of course, some public spaces, which include beer parlors in Africa, in Europe, and of course in North America. You see, to every project, there is always a backstory. The Fuji documentary did not begin as a film. In 2019, I began to work on a book, a typical academic book, a monograph. So each year I write a blog about my findings on Facebook and then provide some necessary context to help people understand what's the historical context of what I was writing about. My Facebook friends began to engage my writings for the first time. For the first time, a lot of friends who are not historians, who are not academics, who are not familiar with the ways that academics do their research, began to expand on my work and even in some cases provide guide, correction, and lead to the people I could interview for the project. And for the first time, my scholarship began to reach a wider non-academic audience, not necessarily because the topic was on music, which naturally attracts a lot of people's attention, but also because of the very lucid style that I was adopting in writing about my findings, and of course with images, historical and contemporary images that put some of the ideas in the right context. So it soon occurred to me that if I want to do the best possible work in terms of reaching the wider audience, it's important for me to do more than write a book. So we all know that academic monographs by their design have limited audience in terms of the style that we use in writing them, and of course audience in terms of the circulation of these works. Most of the books that we write and produce in North America are not affordable on the African continent. Even if they are affordable, distribution is always a big problem. So in addition to writing an academic monograph, I decided to also produce a 10-episode documentary on Fuji. Very few academic historians of Africa today are directly producing and directing documentary films. For decades, academic historians of Africa have left the field of documentary filmmaking to quote-unquote conventional filmmakers. Academic historians of Africa use documentary films for our work. And of course, we use it for our classes, we use it in teaching. And of course, we always get pissed off by so many problems. Some of them include the oversimplification of complex ideas about the past. Some of them include misrepresentation of events of the past. Yet, I think that a typical historian, a lot of us who have, of course, PhD, or a typical academic, whether historians or scholars of African and African diaspora, can actually produce a documentary film. The reason is simple. We write a doctoral thesis, and my own assumption is always that if you can write a doctoral thesis in the social sciences or in the humanities, you can make a documentary film. The reason is simple. Film writing or filmmaking is about storytelling. And if you can tell stories, you can make a documentary film. Now, of course, conventional quote-unquote filmmakers may be mad at me for simplifying what appears like very complex, but what I've done with my project is not only to produce this documentary, but to also help scholars and graduate students coming after me to also do exactly what I'm doing. And there's no way we can encourage people to do documentary film without simplifying the process. So my mission actually goes beyond just producing a 10-episode documentary film, to also figuring out a way to persuade and convince my colleagues, predominantly academic historians and non-historians, to also make documentary film. And one way to do that, like I said again, is not only to simplify the process, but at the same time provide the resources. And my mission, long-term mission, is to have an equipment loaning system that allows me to loan equipment to graduate students or colleagues who would like to make documentary film of course, provide training in terms of master classes and regular seminars, and last but not the least, of course, money. Put some money into this thing. So I conceived the Fuji documentary as a class leveler, something that would level class. I imagine it as a historical and an artistic work that would appeal to the wide range of people's intellectual, aesthetic, and recreational need. For the first time before my father passed away in May 2024, I allowed him to see the first cut of the documentary in June 2023. And for the first time, he was interested in what I was doing as a scholar. He had never been interested in what I'm doing. The most powerful thing is just for him to get his check every month. That used to be the deal. And and then even though I tried to be excited about telling him about all the books I've written and how very great those books are, but it would never be excited. But for the first time, in June 2023, a year before he passed, I allowed him to see the first cut of the documentary, and he engaged me. That actually told me that if my own biological father could be interested in what I'm producing for the first time, then the wider audience could also be interested. From an international documentary film festival to an academic conference, and from a college campus to town halls, and of course from leading professors of film and popular culture in Europe and North America, to beer vendors and beer parlors in some of the most obscure locations in southwestern Nigeria, the reach of my documentary affirms the power of creative knowledge, not only to bridge, but to also block classes. So what you're seeing here are the places I've been screening documentary, and this particular slide you see is actually a town hall model that involves predominantly local artisans. The man you're seeing there is a chief, a local chief. And of course, these are students of the Polytechnic Ibadan performing as part of the documentary screening. So I've screened this documentary in places ranging in terms of audience and in terms of so many other things. And what this convinced me is that academic knowledge can actually be domesticated or presented in a way that appeals to the creative, artistic, epistemic interest of a wide range of people. So it's one thing to have an idea, it's another to implement or work the idea out. To produce a documentary film that would appeal to a wide range of people, I built narrative around transcultural ideas that most people can connect with, images and visuals that tells fascinating stories in very sophisticated way, and of course historical rigor that does not lose sight of simplicity. The visual arts of my documentary, including paintings, must be easy to read, and at the same time they must invite my audience to deeper critical as well as subversive intrinsic readings. The language of this documentary, both in English and in Yoruba, must communicate complex ideas, but at the same time it must give room for advanced or extended coding, extended reading. As it turns out, the problem with academic or what you can consider as school history is not that the public does not want to learn about the past, or doesn't mean that people don't like history. I think the problem is the way that we communicate these ideas. So it's just the way that some of the ideas being communicated are not presented in a way that connects with the living realities of the people, or of course, because also some of these ideas are not, some of them are actually anachronistic. So what I'm trying to do with my documentary film is then to bridge multiple terrains of ideas, from ideas that connects with hardcore academic interpretation of the past to ideas that can be used to connect with contemporary development. It does not necessarily mean that history has to teach a lesson, but the way I conceive the project is to allow a wide range of people to see themselves in this project in different ways. So when I set out to produce the Fuji documentary, I imagined creating something that the public would find valuable without compromising the core tenet or the core principle of historical research. I wanted to serve ordinary people with my ideas, with my talent, with my energy, with my skill. After publishing about 8 books, I think that it is time for me to create knowledge that will appeal to a wide range of people. So historical documentary making, of course, is not the only way that historians can connect with the public. Exhibitions, there are so many other ways, but this is the way I have decided to produce knowledge. So it's not then, another part of it is not just to produce this knowledge this way, also to create the terms and conditions for critical knowledge production. That way, how do we elevate historical documentary making to the level of critical scholarship? That way, it's not just about visuals, it's not just about the content, it's about critical scholarship. And I'm happy to say that today, many scholars are beginning to see creative knowledge as a valid way to create knowledge. That way, we should begin to assign significant importance, both in rigor and creativity, to documentary filmmaking, among other creative ways of producing knowledge. It's still going to be very hard for us to, it's going to take a while for us to get to a stage where documentary filmmaking will be like a substitute, for example, for a monograph or academic work. I think we should begin to have that conversation at the most sophisticated level. So what I'm going to do again is not to bore you with the context. I think I've provided context. I think what's more important is for you to see 1 hour out of 2 hours, and then after seeing it, then we can have the Q&A. Let's see if, and then okay, I should be able to launch this. I think I have. I think you put it in a folder, so.
Documentary. I just had like a very basic question myself, which is whether you could speak to the, particular features that makes this genre, like that defines the genre as it is, and maybe a little bit about how it's evolved over time.
Oh, maybe we can take a question, right? And then,
okay.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for the documentary. Looking at for the time I've been in school, one of my concerns when writing is how we get tied to a story, and which I always feel like literature does best by giving us scenes of different places at different times, so that the reader can have a kind of a diverse other world as this story is going on. In that sense, I don't know how it was for you, because for me, seeing the documentary, yes, it's about Barrister, but I was wondering that as this was going on for Barrister, what else was going around him? And I felt like that would really come out in a documentary, like allowing us to see the different things playing out as all this is going around in Barrister's life, because that's always been a struggle. Like, how do I tell the story so that it's not so rigid only to my narrow view, but also my capacity as a thinker in one time and space? Thank you.
Okay, maybe I should try to respond quickly before I lose thought of the. So what you saw now is actually 1 out of 2 hours. And then it's also 1 episode out of multiple episodes. So the second episode is going to be about, so he founded the genre, he created the genre in the 1970s. And so the first episode is like a biographical research, a biographical narrative about his life and times, spanning from when he was born all the way to when he died. And so the remaining episodes are going to be thematic, where I will be picking on specific topic. For example, the second episode comes out next year, March, to commemorate the International Women's Day. And it's going to focus on women of Fuji, which is women's role as wives, as daughters, as lovers, as artists, and so many overlapping roles of women in Fuji. And then there's another episode on global Fuji, which is going to talk about how Fuji became a global phenomenon, and so thematic episode like that. So the point and the emphasis is that the first episode is meant to honor him as the creator of the genre, and that's just all. The remaining one will begin to engage with everyone involved in terms as a big popular culture. And so the question about what was going on. So what I tried to do, especially today, is actually to screen to you a part that talks about one of the most difficult conversations we had about African popular culture with this genre. This genre is a patronage music, which has to do with being paid to perform. You have to pay to perform. And the last section I try to let you see is the one on politics, which is an attempt to see the rebel element of a music genre that has to do with patronage. So what I tried to do with this first episode, essentially, is to actually focus extensively on the life and times of the man that created it. And then today what you see is only, so other sections that you did not see actually has to do with love and man is married, his family life. His creative life is also there. How he composes, this, is also there, which I didn't introduce. And of course, the question you were trying to ask, which is the evolution of the music itself. There's a section you didn't see, which is how the genre emerged and transformed from the Islamic tradition all the way till it became a secular music. All those things are not there because it's 2 hours. But what I'm trying to do is that essentially by next year, towards the beginning of next year, when the second episode is going to be out, I will release this episode on YouTube for everyone to see. So that way, you guys can see the ones that you did not see. It's 2 hours, so you only saw 53 minutes or so, and then other episode. So this documentary is an academic documentary. The time used in doing it is my research time, so it's not like a side hustle. And some of the challenges I've had is about copyright matters, especially with the song and in art, and then so a member of the family wanted to get some money from me, this kind of things, and then so so the conversation I was having with you at the beginning is that my mission is not just to produce this documentary. My mission is also to teach how to make historical documentaries and help you understand the problems I encountered and how I'm dealing with the problem. I think that if I'm not honest and very vocal about the challenges that I confront, I think I'm not doing a good service to what the work is all about. So that's going to, and part of the logic again is that it's fair, so I'm using fair use. Fair use is this doctrine that allows you to use copyrighted materials for academic and research purposes. Maybe I didn't tell you that a guy is actually trying to get Netflix to buy the documentary, and I've received about 5 offers to buy the documentary on different streaming platforms. But I cannot sell it. And the reason is also because the equipment, I have 4 cameras that I use, 2 in Nigeria and 2 in the United States. And so I can't sell it because it's going to be like I'm commercializing the work for which I've already been paid. I'm paid to do research. As professors, part of our salaries for research. So these are some of the, I could talk forever about the ethical questions about this and my approach, my creative impulses, how the storytelling devices I adopt. And it's clear to you that some of them appear to be like the real people who know about the stories. And you may not even be able to tell those who are performing the script. So I wrote the scripts. Some of the cast members don't even know anything about Fuji. They're actually just reading the script. And so when I went to screen documentary in Belgium, a professor from KU Leuven actually said, we were having a conversation about the epistemic question of you using the cast member, like using actors instead of people who are not familiar with the story. And the question and my response is that you have voiceovers in documentaries. Voiceovers or presenters don't even have to know anything about it, right? From new casting to documentary filmmaking, the person that did the screening, the person that did the shooting is not the one that does the scripting. The person that does the scripting is not the one that does. So you can actually have someone to narrate a document, and that person does not even have to know anything about it. The person could have been chosen because of their talent in narrative devices. And I don't want to preempt your questions, but these are some of my issues that are emerging out of it. Subsequent episodes, like I said, are focusing on specific topics, and part of my approach is that I shoot everywhere I go. That's another thing I do. Since this documentary came out, I've been traveling all over the world screening. And then I'm going to Oklahoma State next month, then I go to Georgetown in Washington in April, then I go to Napoleon in May. So one of the advantages of all this movement is that it allows me to shoot the documentary everywhere I go. Even conferences that I attend, is like, and I think I've written about this on LinkedIn, how I'm combining the documentary screening with shooting subsequent episodes, and how this documentary is actually helping me to pay for the subsequent episodes, because once you screen, you'll be able to shoot, and then it allows you to use the same material, the same movement and iteration. And the last but not the least, before I let you ask more questions, is the model of how I see movement as a way to get data. For example, of us travel, we go to archives. You know, at this age, maybe you should go with your phone and start shooting. Maybe that's a documentary. It's actually much easier today to make documentary than it was. And I can assure you that some of the images you saw, I did the shooting myself. I can also shoot myself professionally. I was in London in first week of December. I was in Belgium in October. I was in Chicago for the ASA. Everywhere I go, I shoot all by myself, independently. It's a lot of work because the equipment is about 60 or 70 pounds. The stand and everything, and I can do all this. So my mission is, like I said, to repeat again, it's not just to make this documentary, but to simplify it and get as many as possible people to join me in reducing critical historical knowledge into visuals.
Thank you so much, Professor Aderinto, for this really interesting documentary. So I have two questions, but of course you don't have to answer both. My first question is basically to ask you very simply, how did a scholar of African history become a filmmaker? I think for me, because I work on, one of my research interests is Nollywood, which is Nigeria's movie industry. And I know that sometimes when I'm close reading a film, I have a lot of, say, doubts, because my training is more in literary studies than, film studies. So close reading the film, there are all sorts of things that you're thinking about in terms of the technical aspects of the film. So, and I sometimes have to even consult people, I think what I'm seeing here is this. Are you sure this is exactly what I am seeing? So I just want to know about the technical process of how you went from being a strict, a scholar in the sense of what we know and understand as academic scholarship to filmmaking as a part of your scholarship. And also my second question is, what would looking at this, I know that you've had a wealth of experience and just all sorts of, I imagine all sorts of different encounters. So I was wondering, what would you say has been your most interesting encounter in the course of this work so far?
Okay, thank you. So I think, maybe I should quickly respond before we can take, because I want to be able to remember the questions. So, how did I move from a conventional historian to a filmmaker? And I think the response is that, as I said at the beginning of the lecture, I was doing research ethnography, I was sharing pictures, I was writing about this on Facebook. My Facebook, a lot of people here are my Facebook friends, and I was writing about all these things, and it became clear to me with those writings that actually, how do I tell the story of a fascinating musical culture with just text alone? Why don't I just make a documentary? Now, so how did I make that transition now from saying, oh, I'm just going to be writing ethnographically about my work, or historical ethnography, showing pictures, and then providing visuals? That transition comes with a lot of learning curves and a lot of humility. So first and foremost, I contacted friends who have made documentary. They're not historians, they're not academic historians, and asked them the first element, the equipment to use. So this equipment, I use what they call Mark IV, and it's a Netflix level quality document. It can shoot Netflix. The equipment actually, some of the cameras they use in shooting some Netflix films, my own is actually higher than some of them. So that's the process. The first process is first asking people. So my camera is $5,000, the lens and the body, and minus the stand and the accessory. Let's say everything put together 6,000, and I have 4. I have 2 in the US and 2 in Nigeria. So to answer your question, the first process is asking people the right equipment. I didn't know anything. So that's number one. Number two, when I got to Nigeria, I got a videographer to teach me how to use a camera. And so the first process is shooting with someone that knows how to do it. One thing we need to understand is that maybe one of the advantages of capitalism is that the cameras they make today are actually made for you to use them. You see, one of the challenges that people have is that when they talk about documentary making, what comes to your mind is big cameras that you see CNN use. Today, I can assure you that the cameras I use, they are just like this, and honestly, they will shoot something better than what CNN will shoot. The reason is because as technology is advancing, equipment are not only becoming smaller, they're also becoming user-friendly. So to answer your question about filmmaking, the cinematographic element, if you follow me to shoot 3 or 4 times, the 4th time you will shoot independently. And the reason is, of course, it's about technical aspect, and you can grow technically, but you will be able to do it at the most basic level. And you know what we hold it is the basic level. Once you start your entry level, you can begin to advance through it. So that's my story. The first shots you see, some of them, depending on how very attentive you were paying, some of them were not that perfect. You can see some of them not really very nice. Those were the first set that were shooting 4 years ago. With time, if you notice, there's upgrade in the quality and the position of the camera. So that's number one. The other part is, I believe in picture, what they call picture composition. When I shoot, I want you to see more than the text and more than the image that is talking. I want you to see the environment. So it's part of my own unique creative, my own unique creative orientation, that the images you see should be able to tell advanced stories or additional stories. So that when the person is talking, you are also able to read meanings to whatever that you see behind it. And so that part is a different part because it has to do with where do I shoot? How do you get the location? These are big questions. Getting the location, talking to people. I can talk about that forever, but there's no way I want to shoot in Nigeria that I cannot shoot. And the reason is simple. I know how to beg people. That's just it. If you don't know how to beg, you can't get, I know how to do paperwork, and I don't really care about begging. I don't care. Because at the end of the day, what's more important is the outcome of the work. So I think humility is one of the most important elements. Because in humility, you can learn what you don't know. And you can learn, and the people who will teach you what you don't know are people who don't even have advanced knowledge of what you have. So I'm a professor of history. I started making documentary when I was already a full professor. But how then do I begin to learn from people who don't even have a college degree about how to use the lapel camera, how to use the microphone? All the basic elements require learning, and it requires a lot of humility. So to answer your question, the simplest way I think I can answer it is to say that I make a transition from being a conventional historian to a filmmaker by being very humble, by understanding the transformative knowledge of visuals, by being able to learn. Some of these things that you see we can learn them on YouTube, and I don't really care. I will learn anything I need to learn. Even when I'm shooting, like I said, I was in New York, I was in Newark, I was in Chicago, I was in Belgium, 3 cities in Belgium. I was in London twice, in September and in December. And I was doing this independently. When I get into trouble, I have people on call. They're in Nigeria with WhatsApp videos. They get me a WhatsApp video, there's a problem with the setting, the camera is not what it's supposed to do. Then they connect me with WhatsApp video and we work together, and then before you know it, sometimes at 2 a.m. in the morning, I have 3 people, 3 in Nigeria, 2 in the US I can call. So that way, the point of emphasis is that we can leverage technology. That's where I'm going. We can leverage technology today than in the past. And honestly speaking, it's not as difficult as it appears, honestly. You can also make it up. But my biggest strength, this is where it is. My biggest strength is storytelling. I have a PhD in history. And if you can write, whether it is history, sociology, political science, African studies, if you can write a doctoral thesis, you can make a documentary. You see, what I have is what filmmakers want. To have the experience that I have, you have to go to grad school and work your way through all these troubles. I can learn what a filmmaker knows within a month. But you know what is going to what's going to take you to know what I know? It will take you whatever. So the point is that the technical aspect of this thing, you can learn it. Worst case scenario, master classes. Follow me around for like 5 times. But the storytelling, knowing where the research is, knowing how to write. Some of the text of the documentary they sounded like a book text. That is it. Some of them, what you see is, a friend of mine called it teaching history. My model is simple. When we write history books, and I'm happy that Dr. Filipino is here, we are talking about voices and perspectives. So we are merging ideas and tones. We're merging different levels of authority, different levels of sources. Each source that we put together to create a book tells us different things. And it's not only the materials they give us, it's also about the quality and the textuality. The textuality could be English, it could be Yoruba, it could be African language that you translate to English. So a typical good article, when we write a typical journal article or a book, is not only about bringing all these ideas together, stitching them, it's also about stitching them in such a way that there's coherence, there's flow. So that each sentence that you utter helps you to better understand the text itself. And each sentence is either you are narrating for a historian, or you are contextualizing, or you are theorizing, or you are summarizing. So a typical journal article or a book would have all these elements: historical background, theoretical background, contextualizing. So that each sentence itself is not only helping you to go through the entire text, they are adding value because of the different tonation that they bring. And that's what you see in this documentary. An academic historian will produce a different kind of documentary. So what did I do? I got each of them to tell me similar stories and cut in between to create a sequence. That way, I don't want one person to be talking forever. I don't want to be bored. In fact, there's nowhere I screened this documentary. People sat down for 2 hours. 2 weeks ago, I was in Nigeria. The entire population was students. The entire place was filled. Almost like 150 students from Unilag. No one stood up at least for 2 hours. The reason is simple. If I can create a sequence in such a way that you don't have a monotonous voice, one guy is not just talking from somewhere, and you can have the voices and everybody's talking, and create a sequence. Not only are you going to be, the attention is going to be higher, it's also going to help to expand the textuality. But what you are hearing is not only information, you are hearing information being presented in different ways. So the lead narrators, those three people and one lady, they are the lead narrators. What I did is to get them to tell me the same story, guide them through the story. They know the story, I know the story. And because I'm a historian, I can come in occasionally to contextualize. If I need to contextualize, I can curate people to help me. Those are the three ladies you saw. So those three ladies were basically contextualizing, because sometimes there's a between narrative and theoretical expositions. And I don't want to be the one talking all the time. So what I did is now get 4 people, 3 ladies and 1 person, to be the one to help with the transitioning. After I've already curated 4 people to tell the stories. So in telling the stories, I know the stories, they know the stories. How do you get them to tell the stories? And I have to direct. Some of the reasons you see actions, honestly, is because there's a lot of improvisations there. Sometimes I tell them to tell me story twice or 3 times, and I get the best action out of it. Sometimes when people talk the first or second time, for you to get, because I call it putting energy in words. I just don't want them to talk. I want them to put energy in what they're saying. And for it to be like a film, to be like as if they're acting, I want them to act their words. The only way they're going to act their words is to bait them. The fact is fact. They're not lying. But I want them to be able to tell fact in a way that is engrossing. It's not the same thing. So nobody taught me this. The honest truth is that I didn't learn how to make film from anybody. One of my friends was like, who's your mentor? No. I have watched a lot of documentaries, and I'm pissed off by so many documentaries. So the whole idea is that if I ate out some documentaries I made, what can I do to make my own? The things I learned about this work is how to use the camera. I have my technical people who taught me how to use the camera. I have a video editor in Nigeria. I can also talk to you about how I edited. I edited with Zoom. My video editor is in Ibadan, in Nigeria, and we do it virtually. I can talk forever. And that's a very easy way, not only to do it very well, but also to reduce the cost. So what is going to cost me $20,000 in the US, it's going to cost me less than $500 in Ibadan. And you know what? In Nigeria, exactly the same level of technical capacity. People in Lagos, in Ibadan, in many cities in West Africa, across the entire continent, will do exactly. So that's another conversation. So I learned how to use camera, but I didn't learn the creative impulses. This is from my head. And the reason is simple. You can get technology to do what you want it to do. Some of the sound you're hearing will actually improvised sound, but you can't tell. Because we have problems with some voice sounds, and we have to get them to record again and match it with the lip. I mean, if you're not very attentive, you'll be not able to do. So the point and emphasis is that transitioning from being a typical historian to a filmmaker was not as difficult, because I don't want to make it difficult, honestly speaking. If you know how to beg, if you're very humble, you can do it. It's a game of knowing how to beg people anyway. And begging people, when I was in London, there's a place called Africa Center. Africa Center is a major cultural center in London. They gave me the entire place, 4-story building to shoot for free. It's about begging, right? And it's for free. And last week when I was in Nigeria, I shot at the new museum. It's called the Randu Center. It's breathtaking, millions of dollars worth of edifice in Lagos. I did it for free. So the point and emphasis is that when people look at the quality of my shots, the ones you're going to be seeing in the second episode and third episode, humbly speaking, the first episode is a child's play compared to what you're going to see in the second episode. The first episode is actually biographical on one person. Second episode is about gender. You're going to be seeing about sexuality, about language, about identity, about all these things. So to make that work, not only has my technical quality improved, I'm also shooting in iconic places. How do I get to be able to do these things for free? You have to know how to beg. You have to be humble. And again, I can continue to talk forever about that transition. It's going to be an unending transition, because for each episode require different epistemic technical abilities. For example, the second episode I'm shooting through with a drone. I've never used a drone, and this time I'm using a drone. So it's a work in progress. It's doable. One of the things I wanted to prove, because I'm using this document to also make a statement, is that academic historians, specifically, as a result of the nature of our job, can actually make documentaries. We are closer, academics are closer to being a good filmmaker than actually the so-called filmmaker. You know why? You can learn to use camera. Secondly, you can use creative impulses. It's natural. You don't need to go to a film school. For the best filmmakers didn't go to college. The best African filmmakers that laid the foundation, from Kelani to all of them, go and check. They get the training, but the biggest chunk of what defines them is their creative impulse. And you don't even need a college education to have this creative impulse. So my mission, this is where I'm going. My big mission, and I'll repeat this, I've said this 3 or 4 times already, is to not only simplify, to encourage, and the possibility of getting more and more graduate students to produce Netflix-level documentary without breaking the bank or going crazy. And that's what you don't. The fact that I'm not a trained filmmaker does not mean I will make a crappy documentary, and I've just proved it. I don't have to. I can learn the process and improve on it. Of course, if we bring so-called conventional filmmakers here, they will have a lot of things to say about this. The camera is supposed to be like this, that. But I'm trained to fight conventions. I'm a historian. I'm not supposed to follow any convention. In fact, so don't teach me conventions. My job is actually to not to follow. So don't tell me to follow a law. I don't like laws. Laws don't work for academic historian. The principle of our existence as scholars is to problematize convention. So if what you are seeing does not conform to the way things should be done, I'm happy then, because it means I've won.
Thank you so. Are we on? Okay. Thank you so much for coming to Milwaukee, and thanks for organizing this to the organizers. I've been waiting for a long time to actually see more of this. I've seen little bits and pieces, but thank you for doing this. I think you're being a little self-deprecating, because I could see the thoughtfulness that you engaged with these scenes thoughtfully. I can tell that from the way you presented this. So don't knock yourself. This is a really good film. And taking nothing away from our historian colleagues, I don't know if there are other historians in the room, but thank you for making history fun. I appreciate that very much, rather than just an article or a book. Although I also thank you for the explanation, because I see the parallels. But I think in terms of accessibility, you're right on target. This is going to reach, I think, has the potential to reach a much broader audience. We can't assign full books in our discipline anymore, but we can assign this, and students will find this engaging and enjoy it. And I think you kind of answered my question sort of just a moment ago when you're talking about teaching graduate students to produce a documentary. So will a documentary, could that take the place of a written doctoral thesis?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's where we're going. Absolutely. Thank you. So we have to standardize, and that's where I'm going. So for each place I talk about this documentary, I provide my reflection. You and I know it's going to be hard for us to get to a point where we can get our colleagues to make a documentary in lieu of a book. That's where still, maybe 50 years from now. But some colleges actually are now looking for possibilities of graduate students producing something like that. I know at Wisconsin-Madison, they are thinking about it. They've not implemented. In the history department, a student, a mentee was talking to me about that kind of something, but I don't think they've standardized it. So what we need to do, which is where I'm going, and I mean, I'm saying this for the 6th time now, is not only to do it, but to also provide the resources, simplify the process. I'm not just doing this because I think I can do it. I think that if a lot of people cannot do what I'm doing, it's still useless. And explaining the process is the primary way to do it. So that way, hopefully, graduate programs will be able to produce and provide the templates to do a doctoral thesis with a documentary like this. For me, again, if you can write a master's thesis in the humanities or a PhD, you can make a documentary. Because it's our tough. See, every now and then, people come to me and say they want materials. They're making a documentary. Where can I find materials? Where can I find materials? We write. Writing is natural. And to make a documentary is text. You need a text. Whether they're going to say it off the head or off the hand, or you still need a text. So what it means is that if someone can write a master's thesis, that person who wants to write a doctoral thesis can actually also produce a documentary. But again, how do we standardize it? Number one. 2, how do we provide the terms and conditions that also because it's just music. You can blow any opportunity. You can. So it's also because I think, okay, how can I impose some of the elements of academic conversation into documentary filmmaking? What that basically means is the timeline, for example, the timeline. And if you remember, at the beginning, I told you everywhere I went. That's how I legitimized this work as an academic work. That's what I did. I was in the archive, I was in this, I was in that, I was in this. So because I also want my colleagues, thankfully you are here, you've seen it, to look at it and look at prospects. So maybe, why can't doctoral students do this? If you visit the archive, if you go to Stand Archive, you do this and do that, that's typical way, because we all do research. If you can document it to prove it, it shows that this thing is rigorous. So what I did, there's a section I wrote, Finding in Search of Barry Wonder. That section is strategic to let my colleagues see I did a lot of work. I'm looking for him. And the first image was in his house. I was meeting with his son, interviewing his son. Then I showed you his friend's house. Then I showed you the archives. Then I showed you the sound archive. I was in radio stations, television stations. And I was even showing how I was carrying heavy materials that I was looking for him. And honestly, it's not just performative. That's exactly my process. So that way, so going back to your question, I think first and foremost is to see to be able to convince some of our colleagues that creative scholarly work is actually work. It's actually legitimate scholarship. Second, not only saying we can do it, providing the resources. It's expensive, but I have a lot of advantages. One, like I said, I started with 1 camera 4 years ago, now I have 4. I can explain how my equipment evolved. I can explain where the money came from. So if it's difficult for a graduate student to go to the archive, you know how difficult it is for them to have this equipment. But the other problem is that's why I said, okay, fine. If we have a PhD student who wants to make a documentary, I have equipment. I will loan you my equipment. I'm probably going to have 10 in the next 1 or 2 years. And that way, we can have those equipment. And once equipment is out of the logic, the rest is secondary. Why? Because graduate students go to field work. You go to the archives. So instead of just using tape recorder to record your information, why don't you use the camera and just do the audio visual? And that way you have the videos, and that way you're already collecting materials to make a documentary. So I think that it's possible for us to standardize it, but it has to be rigorous. So where I'm going is the rigor. I really want to impose the rigor. And imposing the rigor is to actually show that we can reduce books into a documentary and have all the critical conversation that we need to have. And some of the things you saw is also not what we do in history. Reference. I did it deliberately. So while they're talking, the references are coming out. And some of the references were actually text imposed on the text. It's deliberate. Sometimes I get the cast people, the people I casted, I get them to read and why I impose the text. So that way, they're not only telling you that for everything I'm saying there's evidence, they're also making the evidence come to life, which is a unique way of also storytelling. Occasionally, some of the things you saw were not were not directed. Some of them were natural. For example, when one of the guys was doing his hand like this, that was a natural thing. I was just lucky to catch it. But a lot of them sometimes is action. Like I said, put life into your words. And you see the way nobody was sitting like this. It's deliberate. I stood them up. So when you stand up, you project. Nobody taught me all this. So much of it is creative impulse, but the only thing I learned to do is how to use the camera. You have to learn it. Whether somebody's going to teach you. The rest is how do you get the place to shoot. That's not a problem. I'm born and raised in Nigeria, so I know Ibadan, I know Lagos, I know exactly. I know where the sources are. The worst case, I'll write letters and beg. Location is my strength, apart from the data. I want you to see the pictures. I want you to see the images. I want the background to tell another story. So I can't just shoot anyway. So let me give another context to what was supposed to happen today or tomorrow. I was supposed to involve Stephen Bolu during the documentary. We're looking for a location. He found some places. I said, no, it's not going to work. So I can't shoot here, for example, here. It has to have some aesthetic element. So I said, okay, you know what we're going to do? Let's wait till Atlanta in November, or let's do it in Lagos. I would rather not shoot than shoot in a place that doesn't have the right aesthetic quality. So these are the considerations that when we combine the text with the visuals, maybe we can get something that is very sophisticated and mind-blowing. But to cut the long story short, we have a long way to standardize. But this is the beginning. This is a new phase of my career. There's a book. Maybe I didn't tell you, yes. There's actually a book of Fuji. I have a full draft. So another reason if there's another thing, if there's something you like about this documentary, it's also because there's a book. I've done the research. I have the data, I have the narrative. So that's another thing. It's a different ballgame game entirely when you're carrying cameras around and think big. No. Today everybody wants to make a documentary. All these kids, all this Gen Z, they're all around with iPhone 4, they think they can make documentary. Yeah, let us encourage them. But this is not child's play. There's a book. The book is going to come out maybe in 2 years from now. So the quality of the documentary is also the quality of the research. That is why it is like that.
Okay, I think I would like to ask my question.
Okay.
Yeah, before any other person asks. Thank you so much, Prof, for this wonderful documentary. It's really fascinating. So my question is on your sources and how you are going to navigate the bias in this documentary, because this is the first episode, and virtually all the people you interviewed, everybody was just eulogizing Barrister. So how would you balance that narrative? Like, do you intend, because as a star that he must have made enemies. So how do you balance that narrative, so that it will not be as if he was this kind of
saint?
Yes.
Yeah, it's because you didn't see the entire documentary.
Okay.
It's 2 hours. Some parts were fighting. At some point in the documentary, I was interviewing someone that was fighting me. No, that's not what happened. Yeah. Well, I told him, is that what happened? He said, no. So there's a portion where we're talking about a big problem where his band ran away and he got into trouble. He was fighting. So the first fight, the one I showed, the fight with his publicist and the fight with the government is just for us to have a convention. There were times the entire band ran away and a big problem, and I went into the public conversation and balanced what people were saying. And there was a time where in the documentary we're actually contesting the truth. There's also a problem about women too, about artists, women, a lot of women, and had a conversation about promiscuity and this and that. Yeah, it's also there. So it wasn't presented like a guy that was perfect in all devil. No, there's a way to do that. So you only saw 53 minutes out of 2 hours. I'm not telling you so, but this doesn't. But however, this does not remove the big challenges when you are working with contemporary history. No. You see, this man is a prophet in Nigeria. There are some things you cannot say about him. That's just the honest truth. The following, you need to go to this. He has almost like is the most celebrated Yoruba artist who has died today. he has like maybe 11, 12 Facebook pages, like fan pages. There's a festival organized in his honor. He's a huge person, and his fans are not just lawyers. He's a prophet. So I agree with you. So when I was making the documentary, I had to be careful about certain narratives. Not only because there's no evidence, but also because the narrative may create a wrong impression of my mission, and unnecessarily create unnecessary distraction from the critical mission, which is to not only simplify complex ideas, but also get more people to encourage to do documentaries. And there's so many things going on in this documentary that I really want people to be able to engage. So when you plug too much into unnecessary controversy for which you don't have evidence for, unfortunately, you are actually creating unnecessary distraction. So in the documentary, I did actually introduce some of these controversies. His band members, his lead talking drum left, and I contrasted the narrative, what everybody was saying, different groups. And there was a time where somebody was actually fighting me over what actually happened. But the point of emphasis is that contemporary history is a difficult history to write. It's not like history of 300 years ago, 400 years ago. This genre emerged in the 1970s. And so in other words, for every conversation you're having, at least people are there to contest it. So my problem is not that I'm not afraid of having people contest the truth with me, or contest what constitutes the truth or fact with me. But what's more important for me is being able to problematize, to provide evidence, to problematize, and have this critical conversation that does not distract us from the main mission. In other words, I don't want bare parlor conversations. I want critical conversations. And it's easy to have when you're talking with popular culture and pop culture, if you're not very careful, critical conversation can easily be reduced to bare parlor conversation. And I don't want that. I really want to have a conversation that can be the basis of critical ideas and encourage more people to do exactly what I'm doing.
Other questions?
Thank you so much.